Modern Queen Tales presents The Shadow Architects. The jury foreman handed the verdict slip to the bailiff. The crisp white paper passed through the trembling hands of the court clerk before landing on Judge Thorndyke's mahogany desk. The courtroom air felt heavy, saturated with the recycled breath of 50 reporters and the suffocating tension of a billion-dollar corporate fraud trial. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a low, steady note against the silence. On the count of systemic market manipulation, Judge Thorndyke read, his voice amplifying through the brass microphone, we find the defendant, Wagner Holdings, guilty. On the count of criminal conspiracy to defraud federal regulators, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of massive-scale wire fraud, guilty. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The prosecution table erupted. My junior associates, Warren and Camille, slammed their hands onto the oak surface, cheering a victory that took 3 years of relentless litigation, sleepless nights, and the parsing of 10 million encrypted emails. The court sketch artist frantically shaded the scene. The reporters in the back row scrambled for the heavy wooden double doors to file their breaking alerts. I stood perfectly still. I watched the CEO of Wagner Holdings, Malcolm Brana. He sat across the aisle at the defense table. He straightened his tailored Italian suit jacket. He checked his platinum Patek Philippe watch. He smiled. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. A man facing complete corporate dissolution and decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary does not smile at his watch. He does not check the time as his legacy burns. He checks the time because he is waiting for a schedule to execute. I packed my leather briefcase. I slid my legal pads, my red ink pens, and the sealed manila folders into the compartments. I locked the brass latches with a sharp, decisive click. The marble floors of the federal courthouse echoed with the stampede of journalists rushing for the exit. I walked out into the humid late afternoon air of downtown Manhattan. The exhaust from idling news vans choked the street. I pulled my phone from my trench coat pocket to call my sister Shannon. We planned to celebrate at the steakhouse on 54th Street. The screen displayed a solid red, no services indicator. I tapped the glass. I toggled the cellular data switch in the settings menu. The indicator remained red. I forced a hard reboot of the device. The Apple logo appeared, faded, and the red slash returned to the corner of the screen. A block away, I spotted a bright yellow taxi. I raised my hand. The cab screeched to a halt at the curb, throwing a spray of stagnant puddle water onto the sidewalk. I slid into the cracked vinyl back seat. The smell of stale coffee and industrial air freshener filled the confined space. JFK Airport, please, I said. My gut instinct overrode my dinner plans. Brana's smile dictated a rapid change of location. The driver tapped the acrylic partition. He pointed a stubby finger at the glowing meter. Credit card reader is down. System update or something. Cash only. I opened my wallet. I pulled out my Bank of America debit card. I stepped out of the cab and walked to the ATM built into the brick wall of the corner bodega. The machine hummed under a flickering neon beer sign. I slid the card into the slot. I typed my 4-digit PIN. The screen flashed a brilliant, blinding blue. A loud, mechanical, grinding noise echoed from the internal card reader mechanism. The machine seized my card. The screen displayed a single word in stark, black, block letters. Confiscated. My phone vibrated violently against my palm. A single emergency alert bypassed the dead cellular network. The message forced its way through a backdoor broadcast channel utilized exclusively by the Department of Homeland Security for imminent national disasters. I stared at the harsh white text on the screen. Federal warrant. Issued. Rachel Anniston. Charges. Espionage. Treason. Cyber. Terrorism. Do not approach. highly dangerous. I looked up. The giant LED billboard flashing the daily stock ticker above Times Square flickered. The green numbers charting the Dow Jones Industrial Average vanished. A high-resolution photograph of my face filled the 100-foot screen. The image came from my Federal Bar Association ID card. The same charges scrolled in brutal red letters beneath my chin. Pedestrians on the sidewalk stopped. They looked at the screen. A woman standing 10 feet away, holding a shopping bag, looked from the glowing billboard directly to my face. Her eyes widened. I shoved my hands into the deep pockets of my trench coat. My fingers curled around the cold metal casing of the encrypted flash drive I secured from the Wagner servers during the initial phases of legal discovery. The drive contained the raw, unredacted audit files Judge Thorndike deemed inadmissible for the trial on the grounds of national security relevance. The coordinated speed of this attack revealed the absolute truth. I possessed the evidence of a systemic legal breach. The state-sponsored retaliation sought to erase me before I could analyze the raw data. I turned down a narrow, trash-lined alleyway between two towering glass office buildings. I walked fast, my heels clicking against the damp pavement. I pulled the battery from my dead phone. I snapped the SIM card in half. I tossed the dismantled pieces into a rusted industrial dumpster overflowing with cardboard boxes. I became a ghost in the city I just conquered. The basement of the abandoned Brooklyn shipyard smelled of salt, motor oil, and decaying concrete. I sat on a broken wooden crate in the center of the cavernous, windowless space. I opened my air-gap-filled laptop. I purchased the heavy-duty Panasonic Toughbook 3 years ago for exactly this type of localized off-grid analysis. I plugged the Wagner flash drive into the primary USB port. The screen cast a pale blue glow over the damp, cinder-block walls. I traced the breadcrumbs from the routine corporate audit of Wagner Holdings. The financial ledgers showed massive, sustained capital bleed. Trillions of dollars vanished from Wagner's liquid asset pools into a labyrinth of shell companies registered in non-extradition territories. The money flowed through Cayman Island trusts, Swiss-numbered accounts, and dummy corporations based in the Seychelles. I bypassed the standard corporate encryption layers. I deployed the brute force decryption keys I wrote during my early years analyzing cybercrime at the Department of Justice. The progress bar crept across the screen. The terminal window cascaded with thousands of lines of green code as the script fractured the encryption algorithms. The file structures unraveled. I bypassed the standard human resources and accounting data. I entered a deeply buried subdirectory labeled Jupiter. I opened the folder. The screen populated with hundreds of PDF documents marked with classified federal headers. The red stamps read, Top, Secret, CI, No Foreign. I clicked on a master index file dated June 2026. The intelligence memos laid out the absolute truth of global governance. The documents identified the specific players operating a shadow network far above the reach of standard federal oversight or democratic elections. I read the names: the Director of National Intelligence, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the CEO of the largest global defense contractor in North America, the head of the Central Banking Reserve, the Senate Majority Leader. They called themselves the Jupiter Board. The memos detailed their exact hierarchy. Elias Vaughn, the central banking head, operated as the chairman. The intelligence director managed logistics and enforcement. The Chief Justice provided the legal shielding. They operated entirely outside the democratic process. They dictated global policy through absolute, localized, judicial manipulation. When a multinational oil corporation needed favorable drilling legislation, Jupiter provided the pre-drafted laws to compromise senators and guaranteed a smooth passage. When a whistleblowing journalist got too close to their black budget funding routes, Jupiter deployed federal tactical agents to silence them. They engineered reality from boardrooms immune to congressional subpoenas. The June 2026 memo explicitly outlined the purpose of the Wagner Holdings trial. Wagner served as the primary money laundering apparatus for the Jupiter board. The corporation filtered the stolen trillions and converted the capital into untraceable cryptocurrency and offshore real estate holdings. My legal victory threatened to expose the financial artery of the entire clandestine organization. Malcolm Brana smiled in the courtroom because he knew the verdict held zero power. The shadow government already initiated the protocol to burn my life to the ground. He knew I would be a hunted fugitive before the ink dried on the sentencing paperwork. I scrolled through the geopolitical directives. The scope of their operation paralyzed my breathing. The board orchestrated the recent European energy crisis to force continental dependence on Jupiter-owned natural gas conglomerates. They engineered the localized border conflicts in South America to justify massive defense spending contracts awarded directly to their own subsidiaries. They owned the judges. They owned the courts. They owned the legislative narrative. I disconnected the flash drive. The blue light of the screen illuminated my shaking hands. The legal system I dedicated my life to defending existed solely as a fabricated stage play. The true power operated in the digital dark, writing the script and moving the pieces. I needed to understand the exact mechanics of their attack on my life. I required a roadmap of their digital assault. I accessed the shipyard's unsecured Wi-Fi network through a series of 12 bouncing Tor relays. I routed my connection through servers in Iceland, Romania, and Brazil before touching the domestic internet. I initiated a deep forensic scan of my own law firm's server logs, pulling the archived data from the encrypted cloud backups I secured weeks ago as a failsafe. The forensic evidence painted a picture of absolute surgical precision. The server logs showed the intrusion originated from a cluster of private, untraceable servers operating outside standard IP registries. These private servers established a backdoor connection directly into the federal legal databases and my firm's internal network simultaneously. I watched the timeline of the digital injection. At precisely the moment the jury read the guilty verdict, the private servers executed an automated script. The script injected perfectly forged wire transfer documents into my personal case files. I opened the PDFs. The forged documents showed offshore deposits of $10 million, complete with my exact cryptographic signature. The ledgers documented the routing of the money from a known, heavily sanctioned terrorist organization directly into my personal checking account. They planted classified military drone schematics on the hard drive of my home computer. They fabricated a digital trail of treason so dense and impenetrable that no defense attorney on earth could ever unravel it in a courtroom. They built a cage of data around my life in less than 3 seconds. The attack extended far beyond digital forgery. I opened a global news aggregator site. The psychological warfare tactics dominated the front pages of every major media outlet. The top story featured an exclusive interview with my law partner, Warren. Warren sat in a sterile television studio, sweating slightly under the bright overhead lights. He wore his navy blue courtroom suit. "Rachel suffered under the immense pressure of the Wagner case," Warren said to the camera. His eyes tracked slightly to the left, reading directly from a teleprompter located just off screen. "We noticed a severe decline in her mental stability over the last 6 months. She expressed deeply paranoid delusions about government conspiracies and shadow organizations tracking her movements. She needs immediate psychiatric help. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities." I closed the tab. My stomach twisted. I opened another network feed. I watched my sister Shannon appear on a different broadcast. She sat in her living room. She wore dark sunglasses, hiding her eyes. She read a prepared statement detailing my history of erratic behavior, sudden outbursts, and emotional instability. The absolute terror in her voice translated perfectly through the audio feed. They threatened her. They held her medical license hostage. They likely threatened her family, forcing her to manufacture a narrative of my mental collapse on national television. The media branded me a manic, unstable rogue agent. The talking heads debated my psychological profile. They alienated my allies in a matter of hours. They framed the narrative so perfectly that any truth I spoke would sound like the rambling of a lunatic. I recorded a quick 10-second video on my laptop webcam. I held up the printed June 2026 memo directly to the lens. The Wagner verdict was a trigger. I said to the camera, "I am Rachel Anniston. The charges against me are fabricated. The Jupiter board engineered this frame job to protect their money laundering network." I uploaded the video to 5 major social media platforms simultaneously. I hit the refresh key. The algorithmic suppression operated with terrifying mechanical speed. The platform scrubbed the video in exactly 2.4 seconds. The automated moderation tools flagged my facial geometry, my voice print, and the specific keywords I used. My accounts vanished completely. The screens displayed blank user not found errors. My defense died in the digital void before a single human eye could perceive it. I existed in total isolation, surrounded by an invisible, impenetrable wall of algorithmic censorship. They controlled the information flow with absolute authority. The raw data on my flash drive represented only a fraction of the Jupiter network's true scope. The June 2026 memo referenced a central repository, a physical data center located in an underground colocation facility in Ashburn, Virginia. This facility housed the master servers. The master servers contained the unencrypted ledgers. They held the blackmail files on every compromised politician in the hemisphere. They stored the direct, unredacted communications of the Jupiter board ordering assassinations and economic sabotage. I reviewed the server maintenance schedule buried deep in the Wagner HR files. State actors initiated a remote wipe command the exact moment I fled the Manhattan courthouse. The massive data deletion process required 72 hours to overwrite the physical hard drives completely using a secure, multi-pass wipe protocol. I checked my watch. I had 12 hours left before the shadow government erased their footprints forever. I abandoned the shipyard. I walked 10 blocks to a cash-only auto yard. I purchased a used, matte black Yamaha motorcycle with the emergency funds hidden inside the silk lining of my briefcase. I strapped my laptop bag to the rear seat. I rode south through the night. The rain lashed against my helmet visor, blurring the highway lights into streaks of neon. I pushed the engine to its limit, tearing down Interstate 95. I arrived at the Ashburn facility just before dawn. The building masqueraded as a generic agricultural supply warehouse. The faded sign read, Mid-Atlantic Grain and Feed. The perimeter told a different story. It featured high-voltage chain-link fencing, sweeping thermal imaging cameras, and reinforced steel crash barriers. I bypassed the exterior security, using a blind spot outlined in the facility's architectural blueprints. I recovered those blueprints 3 years ago during a localized fraud case involving the warehouse's original construction firm. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon, and I kept everything. I parked the motorcycle behind a cluster of thick pine trees. I sprinted across the wet grass, timing my movements with the sweeping rotation of the thermal cameras. I reached the eastern wall. I pulled my lock-picking kit from my pocket. I picked the mechanical master lock on the heavy industrial ventilation grate in under 30 seconds. The metal groaned as I swung it open. I crawled through the galvanized steel ductwork. The hum of massive industrial cooling fans vibrated violently against my chest. The air smelled of ozone and filtered dust. I navigated the labyrinth of metal shafts until I reached the primary server room. I kicked the access panel loose. I dropped quietly onto the raised anti-static floor tiles. The room glowed with thousands of blinking green LEDs. The cold, climate-controlled air bit at my exposed skin. 3 men in matte black tactical gear stood near the central server rack. They wore no military insignia. They carried suppressed submachine guns strapped to their chests. They wore night vision optics pushed up on their helmets. State-sponsored cleanup crews. I moved silently through the deep shadows of the towering server racks. I controlled my breathing. I reached the primary central console. The progress bar on the massive monitor showed the multi-pass wipe sequence at 94%. I enacted my pivot. The courtroom represented a dead end. I could never clear my name in a rigged, corrupted legal system. Any trial would be presided over by a Jupiter judge. Any jury would be fed Jupiter-curated evidence. I needed to execute a full-scale, undeniable public exposure of the shadow government. I needed to hand the raw data directly to the public. I pulled a specialized hard drive extraction tool from my bag. The heavy steel claw was designed to rip secure drives from their housings without initiating the fail-deadly self-destruct protocols. I waited for the tactical team to patrol the far end of the long aisle. The heavy thud of their combat boots echoed off the concrete walls. I stepped out from the shadows. I slammed the extraction tool into the primary Jupiter server rack. The metal teeth locked onto the master physical drive. I braced my boots against the rack and ripped the heavy brick-like drive from its secure housing. The alarms blared instantly. Blinding red strobe lights flooded the room, painting the servers in harsh, rhythmic flashes of crimson. "Contact!" one of the guards shouted. I ran. I tucked the master drive under my arm like a football and sprinted toward the reinforced emergency exit doors. Suppressed gunfire coughed rapidly behind me. Bullets shattered the server racks inches from my head, sending spectacular showers of yellow sparks and pulverized silicon into the air. The smell of burning plastic filled my lungs. I hit the crash bar on the heavy steel doors with my shoulder. I burst into the humid, gray, morning air. I vaulted onto the Yamaha motorcycle. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted the throttle. The rear tire spun in the wet mud before catching traction. I launched the bike down the access road, leaving the facility behind as 3 black, unarmored SUVs swarmed the front entrance, their tires screeching on the asphalt. I rode for 3 hours, taking secondary farm roads to avoid the interstate traffic cameras. I secured a cash-only motel room off a deserted stretch of Route 301. The room smelled of old cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. I threw the deadbolt on the heavy wooden door. I connected the master drive to my laptop, using a high-speed data transfer cable. I initiated the bypass protocols. The drive mounted to my desktop. It contained the ultimate prize, the silencer protocols. I read the highly classified documents. The text outlined the exact methodologies the network used to silence high-ranking government officials who refused to comply with Jupiter directives. The files detailed the staged suicide of a dissenting state senator last year, including the exact brand of rope used and the forged handwriting analysis of the suicide note. They outlined the specific, untraceable chemical agents used to induce a fatal heart attack in a vocal federal judge who threatened to audit the defense budget. The protocols represented a mechanized, industrialized system of murder and character assassination. It was fully documented, fully budgeted, and authorized by the Jupiter Board Chairman Elias Vaughn. I prepared for the final, irreversible disclosure. I rented terabytes of server space on a decentralized network of pirate nodes scattered across Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America. I established a dead man switch using a complex blockchain smart contract. If I failed to input a specific cryptographic key every 24 hours, the system would automatically duplicate and broadcast the master files to every major news outlet, intelligence agency, whistleblower portal, and independent investigative journalist on the planet. I organized the definitive proof into easily digestible, indexed folders. I linked the Jupiter Group directly to the engineered water crisis in the Mediterranean. I uploaded the pristine financial ledgers showing billions of dollars flowing from the manufactured drought directly into the private Cayman accounts of Chairman Vaughan. I attached the crystal-clear audio recordings of the board, casually ordering the assassination of 3 international trade regulators who opposed their natural gas monopoly. The evidence presented a flawless, undeniable, mathematically perfect narrative of global subjugation. I activated the laptop webcam. I stared directly into the glass lens. The recording light glowed a steady, bright red in the dim motel room. "My name is Rachel Anniston," I said. My voice remained perfectly steady, ringing with absolute clarity in the quiet room. 3 days ago, the federal government branded me a fugitive. They froze my assets. They manufactured forensic evidence to destroy my life. They coerced my family into participating in a global smear campaign. They did this because I uncovered the Jupiter board. I held the heavy physical hard drive up to the camera. The barcode and federal asset tags faced the lens. This drive contains the complete, unredacted operational history of the shadow government currently dictating our global policy. The evidence proves their direct involvement in the manufacturing of the European energy crisis, the South American border wars, and the systemic corruption of the federal judicial system. They operate entirely above the law. They use our democratic institutions as weapons against the populace. I leaned closer to the camera. I locked my eyes on the lens. I am releasing all classified files, financial ledgers, video evidence, and internal communications to the public domain right now. The torrent link is embedded in this broadcast. This is a call to immediate action. Download these files, mirror them on your local hard drives, distribute them across peer-to-peer networks. Do not trust the mainstream platforms. They will scrub this data within seconds using algorithmic suppression. Rely on decentralized verification. Analyze the unredacted documents for yourselves. The truth belongs to you now. Ensure they cannot erase it. I brought up the final, most terrifying document on my screen. I presented the detailed engineering schematics for Project Oberon. "I leave you with a final warning," I said, my tone hardening. "Next month, the Jupiter board plans to roll out Project Oberon. It is an evolving biometric surveillance grid disguised as a global public health initiative. It will monitor your heart rate, your physical location, your financial transactions, and your complete digital footprint in real time, utilizing existing cellular network towers. They will deploy this technology to identify and silence future whistleblowers before they can ever speak. You have the blueprints now. You have the names and home addresses of the men building it. Stop them." I clicked the upload button. The transfer progress bar filled the center of my screen. The data packets fragmented, heavily encrypting and routing through thousands of decentralized nodes simultaneously. The transfer hit 100%. The files cascaded across the globe, replicating infinitely faster than any centralized algorithm could flag or suppress them. The notification sounds chimed rapidly on my laptop. Independent journalists in Berlin downloaded the files. Hacktivist collectives in Tokyo mirrored the data onto dark web servers. The download count skyrocketed into the millions within 4 minutes. My phone screen lit up with breaking news alerts from independent media outlets broadcasting the raw data. I closed the laptop. I packed the computer and the master drive into my bag. I unlocked the deadbolt. I walked out of the motel room and stepped into the warm, bright morning sunlight. The shadow government operated exclusively in the dark, relying on silence, isolation, and absolute fear to maintain their empire. I stripped away the dark. I handed the fire directly to the world. I pulled my helmet over my head, started the heavy motorcycle engine, and rowed toward the horizon. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.